Africa, 1940. Italy is preparing to bring World War II here, too, to a continent already scarred by decades of colonial rule. Yet this is no simple clash of armies. It is a contest for control of a geopolitical chessboard. The British Empire rules more than 5 million square kilometers in Africa, nearly 20 times the area of the British Isles. Its domain stretches from Egypt to Kenya, spanning eastern and western Africa alike. France administers roughly 7 million square kilometers, from North Africa to the colonies of the Sahel and interior south of the Sahara, an immense belt almost as large as Australia. Italy, for its part, lays claim to more than 3 million square kilometers. Libya on the Mediterranean and Italian East Africa. Eritrea, Somalia, and Ethiopia, conquered and proclaimed an empire in 1936, a vast expanse fully 10 times the size of the Italian peninsula altogether. 3 empires, millions of kilometers to hold, defend, or lose. But it is not merely a matter of flags. At stake lie strategic resources, vital trade routes, and global prestige. Across the desert and on the seas, firm control of ports, roads, supply depots, and the skies themselves will ultimately decide who expands and who topples. On the eve of war, the armed forces present on the African continent were diverse and spread across enormous territories. The British, supported by a multinational Commonwealth army, fielded about 36,000 men in Egypt. British, Indian, and South African regiments charged with defending the Suez Canal and crucial links along the Red Sea and into the Indian Ocean. In Sudan and Kenya, several thousand additional troops were on hand to shield the colonial borders. France, despite being battered by the European campaign, still maintained garrisons in North and West Africa, especially in Algeria and Senegal, amounting to tens of thousands of soldiers guarding its imperial frontiers. On the opposite side, Italy relied on 2 main strongholds. In Libya, it stationed roughly 215,000 troops, fewer than half Italian, and the remainder in Libyan battalions, while in East Africa, more than 90,000 Italian soldiers and over 200,000 locally recruited indigenous troops stood ready. This second front, Eritrea, Somalia, and Ethiopia, spanned territories so vast and remote that supplying them was difficult. Naval power was just as decisive. The Royal Navy, boasting more than 45 warships, including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, operated from Alexandria and ruled most of the eastern Mediterranean. The Italian Regia Marine, for its part, possessed 6 operational battleships, among them the new Littorio and Vittorio Veneto, 7 heavy cruisers, 12 light cruisers, over 120 destroyers and torpedo boats, and more than 100 submarines. Yet these forces were scattered among the Tyrrhenian Sea, Sicily, Libya at Tripoli and Benghazi, and far-flung East Africa. The most powerful units, particularly the battleships, stayed concentrated at Taranto and La Spezia. The danger of a British blockade loomed large, for it could sever Italy's lifelines and undermine the defensive system. In the end, victory would belong to whoever kept the sea lanes under their command, or at least held them open long enough. In late spring 1940, Europe teetered through dramatic hours. France collapsed under the German advance, while an isolated Britain fought desperately to defend its naval and commercial lifelines. As the continent's maps were swiftly redrawn within weeks, Benito Mussolini glimpsed a window of opportunity. Entering the war now might let Italy rise as a truly first-rank power, seize new territories, and turn the Mediterranean into his very own Mare Nostrum. With every passing day, the moment grew more critical. Mussolini was convinced the war would be brief and that striking a Britain already on the ropes would yield victory without excessive sacrifice. On 10 June 1940 came the announcement. Italy declared war on France and Britain. The decision, taken in a climate of exultation, ignored one vital fact. The United Kingdom possessed a fleet and bases throughout the Mediterranean. Mussolini's first major aim was to strangle Britain's sea lanes from Gibraltar to Suez. He believed that swiftly occupying key territories would close every escape to London. Yet he underestimated British sea and air resistance and the coming clashes in North Africa, a reckless gamble that would reshape the fate not only of the Mediterranean, but of the entire African theater.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
On 11 June 1940, only hours after declaring war, the first skirmishes flared in North Africa along the border between Libya and British-held Egypt, centered on Bardia, Fort Capuzzo, and British patrols based at Sollum. Italian infantry and armored detachments probed the defenses at Sidi Omar and Sidi Aziz, yet a true forward offensive stalled amid logistical shortages. Transport vehicles, fuel, and effective coordination with Libya's ports, Tripoli above all, plus Benghazi and the smaller harbors of Cyrenaica, and desert airstrips were all in critically short supply. Meanwhile, in Italian East Africa, General Nassi and the Duke of Aosta launched swift raids to widen their security belt. The seizure of Kassala in Sudan and Moyal in Kenya aimed to disrupt British supply lines, secure outposts, and consolidate permanent Italian possession over the rugged frontier landscape. London's reaction came quickly. Concerned for the safety of the Suez Canal and the sea lanes to India, the British reinforced Marsa Matra, a key coastal node in Egypt. Simultaneously, the Royal Navy stepped up patrols across the Mediterranean, hunting Italian convoys bound for Libya and East Africa. Between June and July 1940, the first major naval clash occurred. In the Battle of Punta Stilo on 9 July, the Regia Marina, escorting convoys toward Benghazi and Tobruk, engaged the Royal Navy. Although the encounter proved indecisive, it inaugurated a long maritime tug-of-war. To this were added Allied air raids and a light blockade of ports such as Tobruk and Benghazi, measures that further complicated Italian offensive plans and stretched already fragile supply lines across the desert. Meanwhile, British signals intelligence began tracking Axis traffic. On 13 September 1940, acting on Mussolini's direct order, Marshal Rodolfo Graziani launched the invasion of Egypt from the Italian positions at Bardia and Sollum, straddling the Libyan-Egyptian frontier. About 70,000 men moved forward, backed by several hundred artillery pieces and a contingent of light L-3 and M1139 tanks, though in limited numbers. The thrust aimed for Sidi Barrani, more than 100 kilometers beyond the border, driven by the belief that the British force in the sector, then estimated at 36,000 effectives, could offer no serious resistance. The Italian High Command expected a swift breakthrough. The Italian units reached their initial objectives, yet instead of pushing on toward Marsa Matra as Mussolini wished, Graziani halted the offensive. Rather than a quick capture of the delta, he ordered a broad chain of scattered fortified camps in the desert, intending to fully consolidate gains. This decision slowed the Italian initiative and gave the British time to reorganize, laying the groundwork for a powerful eventual counteroffensive that would not be long in coming. This strategic pause stemmed largely from logistical difficulties. Seaborne supply lines were thin because convoys were not adequately protected by the Regia Marina. The ports of Benghazi and Tobruk came under constant pressure from the Royal Navy, and daily air raids added further strain. With the Libyan desert behind them, supplying an advancing army became exceedingly complex. The challenges facing Italy increased dramatically with the attack on the Taranto during the night of 11 to 12 November 1940. British torpedo bombers taking off from the HMS Illustrious struck the Italian fleet anchored in the Apulian harbor, crippling the battleships Littorio, Conte di Cavour, and Calo Duilio. The surprise blow upended the balance in the Mediterranean. The Regia Marina, until then a serious threat, drastically reduced its sorties and found it far harder to shield convoys bound for North Africa. The operation's result demonstrated the effectiveness of air raids against capital ships and marked a decisive turning point in the struggle for control of the sea lanes vital to Italy's wider war effort. As a consequence, the supply lines from Sidi Barrani and the entire Egyptian front grew even more vulnerable. With Malta firmly in British hands, the Royal Air Force and Royal Navy dominated the waters between the island and Cyrenaica, inflicting mounting losses on Italian convoys. Without adequate naval support, the Egyptian campaign was becoming increasingly and critically untenable. By December 1940, the North African balance was tilting sharply against Italy. Under General Archibald Wavell, the British planned Operation Compass with a force of about 36,000 men supported by more than 200 tanks, many of them formidable Matilda II. Their aim was to exploit Italy's already fragile supply lines, coordinating army and navy to choke seaborne deliveries. From their base at Marsa Matra, British troops prepared to strike the fortified camps between Sidi Barrani and Bardia, where some 80,000 Italian soldiers, often poorly equipped and backed by only a limited number of M1139 and L3 armored vehicles, held the line. RAF planes were poised to pound any retreat along the coast. The operation opened with a surprise on 8 December 1940. A first decisive blow fell on the strong points of Nibioa and Tumar, whose Italian defense collapsed in a few hours. The advance rolled on toward Bardia, taken on 5 January 1941, and thence to Tobruk. Thousands of Italian soldiers, including many colonial troops, were captured, while losses in equipment and guns ran into the hundreds. The collapse of the defensive line cleared the road to Cyrenaica, putting Benghazi itself at direct risk. Meanwhile, in Italian East Africa, the attrition continued. British forces from Sudan and Kenya, tens of thousands of men, threatened the remaining Italian supply routes on the Red Sea. The fall of Kassala and Galabat, followed by advances into Eritrea and Ethiopia, comprised an entire front of about 90,000 Italian soldiers and 200,000 locally raised troops, hard-won but weakening Italian positions. The naval repercussions were equally disastrous. The Royal Navy, backed by aircraft based on Malta, intensified even more crushing attacks on Italian convoys in the Sicilian Channel and along the routes to Tripoli and Benghazi. As strongholds in Cyrenaica fell one by one, the central Mediterranean became almost entirely a British domain. Deprived of adequate supplies, Italy was forced to slash its ambitions in North Africa, flinging the door wide open to direct German intervention. Politically, the arrival of German forces marked Mussolini's admission that Italy could not sustain the North African War alone. Operational command effectively passed to General Rommel, whose audacious tactics and personal charisma would re-energize the fighting on the Libyan-Egyptian front. Yet the German intervention highlighted Italy's loss of strategic autonomy, underscoring a political defeat for Mussolini. Rome, once determined to dictate events, now found itself relegated to a merely supporting role. In the next episode, we will meet Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, feared, admired, and at the heart of some of World War II's most controversial chapters. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment on what impressed you most. If you know someone who also truly loves great history, share this video with them. The past speaks to those who listen.